It's Friday, the 29th of April 2016. This is Newsroom on SABC News, Channel 404, Jumbo Africa. And a very warm welcome as we broadcast live from Auckland Park Studios in Johannesburg, South Africa, to the rest of the African continent. I'm Elvis Preslin.
And I'm Renee Vest, and we'll be with you until 12 o'clock today. We're also streaming live on YouTube with the entire show available on our YouTube channel. Today, we're focusing on transformation in sports. This after Minister of Sports Fikile Mbalula imposed penalties on 4 big sporting federations, revoking their rights to bid for and hosting any major international tournaments.
Now, today we're asking you that question, our question of the day. It's right there on your screen. Do you think that should transformation in sport be enforced in our schools? That's the question we pose to you, because that's where it starts. That's the beginning of everything. Should it start there? That's the question. Kendall will get you updated on the content of that discussion. But you can let us know what's on your mind on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom, as well as on our Facebook page. But before we get to Kendall, let's take a look at your news headlines. In Pretoria, the North Gauteng High Court will today rule on President Jacob Zuma's spy tape charges. It's all systems go for the Economic Freedom Fighters Manifesto launch at the Orlando Stadium in Soweto tomorrow. And President Jacob Zuma has bestowed the national orders to South Africans and foreign nationals to acknowledge their sacrifice in improving the country. Now, those are all your headlines. Let's now get to Kendall, who will take you through your sports news. A very good morning to you, Kendall.
Elvis, Renee, good morning to you, and good morning to everybody at home as well. This is what we've got for you in the sports later on today. In Super Rugby, the Lions prepare for a massive battle up front with the all-powerful Hurricanes.
1-0 Villarreal in stoppage time. Liverpool looking for the flag that doesn't come.
Liverpool fall foul into a last-minute goal by Villarreal in their first leg Europa League semi-final.
Definitely expect them all to bounce back, especially Lewis, and it's going to be a great battle against him as always.
Now, Formula One Championship leader Nico Rosberg is under no illusion that his chief rival will not be trying to bounce back after a string of failures. And as you know, I've got a massive transformation theme for today. And we're asking you that question once again. Should transformations be enforced in schools? Now, back to the main desk for the news.
Thank you very much, Kendall. The Pretoria High Court will today rule on the President Jacob Zuma's spy tapes charges. A full bench of the North Gauteng High Court will hand down judgment in the matter relating to the dropping of the 783 charges of corruption leveled against President Jacob Zuma. The outcome of the court's ruling could potentially see corruption charges against President Zuma reinstated. In March, the court reserved judgment in the application to have the decision to discontinue the prosecution against President Zuma reviewed and set aside. The Democratic Alliance argues that the decision taken by then-acting National Director of Public Prosecutions, Mokatedi Mche, was irrational and unreasonable. ANC branches in the KwaDukuza region north of Durban have thrown their support behind President Jacob Zuma to complete his full term. The declaration was made during the party's Cadres Forum in Stanger. The ANC in Mpumalanga, led by David Mabuza, says the party structures in that province have made peace with the president's apology. All 3 provincial leadership structures have accepted the president's apology for the frustration and confusion caused by the Nkandla spending fiasco. But Gauteng leaders are not convinced it's enough to mitigate the political damage caused by the saga. The Constitutional Court's findings that Zuma failed to uphold, defend and respect the Constitution has sparked calls from within and outside the governing party for Zuma to step down. It's all systems go for the Economic Freedom Fighters Manifesto launch at the Orlando Stadium in Soweto tomorrow. The party will for the first time be running in the local government elections in August. In the 2014 national elections, the EFF got 25 seats in parliament, making it the third largest party in the country.
Last-minute touches ahead of the party's first manifesto launch. Orlando Stadium in Soweto can accommodate 40,000 people. And the EFF says, come Saturday, the stadium will be filled with red beret to hear the party's election promises from the commander-in-chief himself.
We are the only different thing that's going to happen to these elections this year. There's nothing else, there's nothing new except the EFF in these elections. There's nothing else that is new in South African politics except the EFF. Soon enough, it will be in government, and soon enough it will be in the economy.
The EFF says its manifesto will speak to issues such as unemployment, housing and service delivery. SABC News, Soweto.
President Jacob Zuma has bestowed national orders to South Africans and foreign nationals to acknowledge their sacrifice in improving the country. Among the recipients yesterday were struggle icons, musicians, dancers and academics.
Honouring heroes and heroines for making South Africa a better place. Among them, the mother of the nation, honoured with the Order of Luthuli in silver for her gallant fight for liberation, but due to ill health, unable to accept the honour.
It's just such an overdue recognition of, the contribution that she's made for South Africa, and I think the kind of impact that she's made on the world, and I think it's amazing.
Also lauded, Zwelakhe Sisulu, a towering figure in journalism, chastised for exposing apartheid brutalities through the pen.
Now that he's passed on, resting in peace, his memory is getting stronger, and their footprints are now put in gold and in silver.
Apartheid was fought from beyond South Africa's borders. The Chilean president, who denounced atrocities here, faced persecution in her own country, fighting injustices. And then those who give hope to communities affected by HIV and AIDS. Professor Helen Rees, a champion of public health improvement. Small or big, each recipient's contribution hailed.
South Africa is a much better place to live in now than it was before 1994. We thank all South Africans as well as our friends from all over Africa and the world for their contribution to making our country the success that it has been since 1994.
And others encouraged to follow suit.
Well, it's no mean feat to take an order home. Former President Nelson Mandela was the first recipient of the Mapungubwe Platinum class. Now a call on all to emulate those honoured over the years. Crisalda Lewis, SABC News in Pretoria.
SABC COO Claudi Motsoeneng has meanwhile invited all producers, aspiring, new, emerging and established, to a discussion on local content. The event will be held next Wednesday. Producers who do not reside in Johannesburg are welcome to attend at our SABC provincial offices. The event is on a first-come, first-served basis. For more information, you're welcome to contact or email rsvp.corporateaffairs@sabc.co.za. That's rsvp.corporateaffairs@sabc.co.za. Now, a new labour federation representing over 1 million workers will be launched this weekend. The federation, formed by NUMSA and other splinter groups from COSATU, have vowed to forge ahead for the unity of workers. The Workers' Summit is expected to be launched at the Me Lareng Stadium in Tembisa on Gauteng's East Rand on Sunday.
The history of the labour movement being rewritten with the arrival of the new kid on the block. Addressing the media, the conveners of the Workers' Summit committed themselves to fight corruption within its ranks.
In addition, corruption is diverting billions of rands away from delivery of public services to the poor into the hands of greedy, parasitic elites making the already desperate crisis of unemployment and poverty inequality and collapsing public service even worse.
They also came out in support of the three major banks for suspending accounts of the Gupta family businesses.
If we allow South Africa to go down that route, then we will fast arrive at a kleptocratic democratic order where the predatory elites will be in charge of everything. And very soon, most of the business people will remove their cash and their investments from South Africa. Already, South Africa lost 500 billion rands as a result of activities of the Guptas.
The Banking Workers Union, Finance Union of Workers, also backing the bosses.
If the government is truly concerned, it should have spoken at the time where the banks were busy retrenching, and not only in the financial sector, by the way. We are busy shedding jobs in all these other sectors, but they didn't jump to assign 3 ministers to make an intervention. It's only when now the Guptas are being threatened. And we are saying as FUU, the bank must stand their ground.
The launch of the new Labour Federation is expected to be attended by 3,000 delegates. Montlengani Dipoku, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, that's your news for now, but it's over to Kendall.
Thank you very much, Rainer, for that. It's time for our theme for the day. And with that said, let's start with the scene setter, just so you remember what it is we're talking about.
To revoke the privilege of Athletics South Africa, Cricket South Africa, Netball South Africa, and South African Rugby Union to host and bid for any major and mega international tournaments in the Republic of South Africa as a consequence of the aforementioned federation not meeting their own set transformation targets with immediate effect.
Now, the transformation in sports journey has gone down a new road, with the Minister of Sports, Fikile Mbalula, imposing penalties on 4 of the 5 big federations that make up the South African sporting landscape, revoking their rights to bidding for and hosting any major international tournaments. He literally brought the bite that has long been threatened. Joining us from our Pretoria studios is Dr. Willie Basson, a member of the Eminent Persons Group that's the custodian of the stated mission to revolutionize and change South Africa through sport for the better. Dr. Basson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dr. Basson, when you first got involved, what were your expectations?
Well, I think that our expectations were vested or set in the fact that we would survey and monitor the status of transformation in South African sport, analyze the data that was submitted by each one of the federations involved, and it's about 20, and out of that to make conclusions and to conduct further research to get to the basic reasons and the principles that's involved in transforming sport in the country.
Right. Now, would you say this is political interference by the Sports Ministry to revoke the hosting rights of the federations?
I don't think so, in terms of having been involved for a long time on the subject, and particularly, as I said, over the last 3 years in collecting data and analysing the state of sport. It is clear that there had to be more intervention in making sure that we do not go for another 20 plus years and we stay in the same spot marking time.
Dr. Basson, you pointed out that federations have only got themselves to blame for not meeting the same targets that they signed on. What actually inspired the specific targets to say netball, football, rugby, cricket, this is what you're aspiring to and this is what we're going to mark you on? What inspired those targets?
Yeah, well, I think it was inspired by the fact that for many years we had this very vague target of 50% black representation in our international teams. Now, for 20 years, sport was left on their own, really, except having been spoken to and reminded of this target. The inspiration for this new approach was because there was always the accusation that there's government interference or ministerial interference in this target-setting exercise. It was then decided that, well, let's allow sporting codes then to set their own targets, because we also realized that transformation and the rate of transformation is unique and specific to a sporting code. So sporting codes, as part of the barometer exercise, was allowed to set their own targets in the dimensions of the transformation charter. This they did in April of last year, and they were then audited in the same way as the previous 3 years at the end of 2015, and it was then realized that they did not achieve their targets. The inspiration for those targets, as I've said, is code specific. Rugby set their own targets, cricket set their own targets, and so did netball and athletics. They did not achieve their own targets. On top of that, they were asked and requested to make your targets, project the targets into over the next 5 years. In that way, it was possible to start having a forward-looking way in which is each one of these codes going to change over the next 5 years. It was for the first time in our transformation experience or exercise or project over the last 20 years. So it was the boards and the leadership, and hopefully in consultation with their constituent members, that the decision for the targets that they have set that was taken. It was entirely of their own making.
Dr. Basson, your utterances right now put a lot of clarity on a lot of what you're hearing in the media. One of the biggest losers at the moment, at least in the short to medium term, is South African rugby. They've got the 2023 World Cup bid to think of. They need to be putting in their intention to bid very soon. What do you make of that?
Well, it's put a lot of pressure on rugby, and I think it was acknowledged by the leadership on the occasion of the presentation of the EPG report to the Minister. Of course, the Minister clearly indicated, get your house into order and then I will review the situation. Because it's not draconian punitive measures that was taken in terms of accelerating the transformation process. It was a shot over the bows of each one of these codes to say, we have now struggled for a long time to really make our sport accessible to the bulk of the population. We can no longer ignore the fact that 84% of the under 18-year-old young people in our country is black African. It's only 16% that's either white, coloured or Indian. So it's fundamental. It's not rocket science. If you do not get stuck into this huge, magnificent human capital pool that's on our doorstep to make sure that we are sustainable as a sporting nation in different codes over a longer period of time, we will be in trouble, because we cannot rely on that small pool of people which has been historically the basis of our sporting endeavours. Another important issue is that under 23-year-old South Africans, at this point in time, only 5 out of 100 is white. In 15 years from now, under 23-year-olds will only be recognizable in terms of the one white person in that group. You cannot build a longer-term, sustainable sports system based on the historical composition of our demographic profiles in our national teams.
Dr. Veli Basson, a member of the Eminent Persons Group instituted by the Ministry of Sports to be the custodian of transformation in sports. We thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Right, now there you have it, Dr. Willie Besson giving us the inside edge on what's happening in transformation in sports. It's now over to Elvis President, who's standing by with more news.
Thank you, Kendall. And of course, we're asking you that very important question that links to transformation, because that's where it all starts. At school level, do you think that that transformation should be enforced in South African schools? That is from a primary level up until high school level. So let's continue now with the latest news now. The North Gauteng High Court will today rule on President Jacob Zuma's spy tape charges. A full bench will hand down judgment in the matter relating to the dropping of 783 charges of corruption that was leveled against the President Jacob Zuma. For the latest on the spy tape's judgment, we now cross live to our SABC reporter Tumaole Mshlauli at the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria. Tumaole, a very good morning to you. Please give us an update in terms of what can we expect today at the High Court there. Tumaole, let's just try again and see if you can hear me. Can you give us an update as to what we can expect today?
Well, a very good morning to you, Elvis. And what we can expect today is about an hour in terms of the judgment that's going to be delivered by Judge Ledwaba here at the Pretoria High Court. This is what the Justice said to me in his chambers earlier as I spoke to him. So he's the one who's going to be delivering the judgment, and he says that it should take him just about 60 minutes. It's quite a lengthy judgment that he wants to deliver on this matter of the so-called spy tapes case. But one of the most interested parties, in fact, the party that has brought the matter to court, is of course the Democratic Alliance, and I'm now joined live by Democratic Alliance leader Mmusi Maimane. Mr. Maimane, firstly, for the man on the street, why is it important for the Democratic Alliance to bring this matter to court and reopen what Mr. Mokotedi had basically decided to throw out in terms of the charges against then Deputy President Jacob Zuma?
Well, it's important for the man on the street because if anyone as a South African knows that there's a supremacy of the rule of law, everybody is subject to the same law. It doesn't matter whether you are the president, doesn't matter whether you're the deputy president, doesn't matter whether you are the king. You are subject to the same law of this republic. And when the National Prosecuting Authority must prosecute without fear or prejudice. It can't decide to say, for political reasons, we want to drop a case. That's why this case is absolutely important for our democracy, because if we lose this case, it means that it sets a precedent that in the future, anybody who is aligned to a particular political faction or a particular rulership of the time, they can be absolved of any charges against criminality. And ultimately, I think that's a dangerous precedent for us to set. And so it's important, this case, it's vital that South Africans know they are all equal under the law.
So you contend that the myriad of charges that were set aside due to the contention of political meddling, those charges you maintain President Zuma has to answer to?
Those charges must be instated, because in fact they were put to him and they were irrationally dropped. And what we're simply saying is that they must be put to Jacob Zuma. He must have his day in court, because ultimately what that means is that we are not pronouncing guilt on Jacob Zuma. We're simply asking for him to face prosecution, like any other person. If anybody commits a crime in South Africa, then they themselves face the full might of the law. Why should it be different with Jacob Zuma?
How do you think this reflects on the country, South Africa? We are in the middle of a global economic recession. The president has been right around the world trying to sell SA Inc. Do you think this process reflects negatively on the country?
Absolutely. Look, this is any laws. If you want to invest in any country, you must know that the judiciary is independent. You must know that the rule of law is upheld. How do you go and ask for people to come and invest that if their investment here were threatened legally, they would have no right of recourse, because all of it would be dependent on which political faction they are part of? These are important things to ensure that your credibility internationally is restored. If you want international credibility, you need to have a rule of law that stands. And Jacob Zuma can't go all over the world selling a country, whilst in fact he's willing here to say, if you are politically connected, your charges can be withdrawn against you.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Justice is expecting to deliver his ruling here about an hour or so, that we expect it to be in court in just less than an hour. If it doesn't go the way the DA, as an interested party, expects, where to next?
We will appeal this judgment because we still maintain the principle was right. The simple facts are there were charges put to Jacob Zuma. They were dropped for reasons that are irrational. We've gone through the tapes and there's no evidence in there that suggests that there was a rationality in dropping the charges. Therefore, we think that it's a worthwhile case to fight all the way to the end. And so we'll end up at whatever court, the highest court in the land. And I'm almost certain the presidency would do the same, that appeal the matter subsequent to this. But this battle will continue.
All right. Mr. Maimane, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for speaking to us on SABC News. That was Democratic Alliance leader Mmusi Maimane, just outlining why this case is so important. And in less than an hour's time, we will then be in court for the judgment, which is expected to take about an hour's time. With that, it's back to you in the studio, Elvis.
Thank you, Tumahola. You'll keep us updated on the proceedings there in Pretoria, and we'll keep you updated here in studio what is transpiring. Now, we're asking you, in fact, yesterday we asked you the question, who should get a national order and why? And here are some of the comments that you sent through to us. Remember that you can send it on our Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom. This one came from the Fab One, says, I believe Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma and Dr. Brigalia Bam are deserving recipients. Hashtag national orders. This one from Moshabi says, the late Mail and Guardian journalist Thuli Madonsela and Chief Justice Mogoeng all deserve to be bestowed with the orders. Hashtag national orders there from Moshabi. Mbongeseni says Dr. Kenneth Kahunda deserves a national order in his role of giving refuge to the ANC during the struggle, says Mbongeseni. And this one from Ntabatemba says, the public protector, Thuli Madonsela, deserves this accolade for being a distinguished citizen to improve the lives of the ordinary, i.e. Gogo Dlamini. Those are some of the comments that we saw coming through on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom, also on the Facebook page. Thank you so much for joining in on the conversation. And remember, you can do so the same today on the question in terms of transformation. What do you think? Should we implement transformation at grassroots level and even under grassroots level? And that is at school. Should transformation in sports be enforced in South African schools from a very young age? Because that is where it all starts. Now, let's take a look at our tweet pick of the day, and it comes from Riza at Crime Air Network, and it says, the Mall of Africa mayhem. Now, that follows the opening of the biggest shopping center in Africa. Now, for all you mall rats, if you want to be there, I tell you, it is a nightmare. So I heard some of the reports coming through and some of the pictures that you see there on your screen right now. It is chaos, absolute chaos for those people that want to make good on some of the sales that's being sold today at the mall, yesterday and today, of course. And it's happening throughout the week. Now let's take a look at the front pages of the newspapers from around the globe. And we start off in Europe. The Times reports that 5 members of the shadow cabinet have backed demands for Jeremy Corbyn to expel Ken Livingstone from the Labour Party permanently over remarks denounced as anti-Semitic and beyond disgraceful. It says there, throw Livingstone out of Labour, MPs demand. And in the United States, the USA Today says that an airstrike on a hospital in the rebel-held Syrian city of Aleppo Thursday killed at least 27 people, the latest in what Amnesty International calls a recurring tactic in the Syrian civil war. And then finally in China, the South China Morning Post reports that China and Russia will increase military exercises to strengthen security and defense cooperation amid growing tensions in the disputed South China Sea, rather. That's the South China Morning Post. That's the headlines there that you can see. Those are newspapers from around the globe. Later on, we'll take a look at your papers here at home. But let's take a look now at what's happening around the country in the courts. And we start off in Pretoria, where you just heard the High Court in Pretoria, North Gauteng High Court there, is expected to hand down judgment in the Democratic Alliance's bid to have the decision to drop the corruption charges against President Jacob Zuma to be reviewed. And in Polokwane, the judgment on the case between the Municipal Demarcation Board and the Vuwani community is expected to be delivered at the recently opened Polokwane High Court. Now, those are some of the stories that will keep you updated right here on your favorite channel, Channel 404. This is Newsroom. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back after that.
A very good afternoon. You're watching the Midday Report.
Lunchtime news amplified.
But for now, this is what they call home. Their hope to shift to a higher ground seems to be against the tide.
Midday Report provides you with more than just news stories.
I just want Port Elizabeth to know that they own a world-class theatre.
Good afternoon. You're with the news at 1 in the headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. This is News Live. I'm Natasha Thorpe. Let's take a quick look at what's coming up in your headlines.
Good afternoon and welcome to A View from the House.
For all things news, tune in to Midday Report weekdays at 12 noon only on the SABC News Channel.
Welcome back. My name is Kendall Makhamate. You're watching Newsroom, and we've got a very strong theme today. It's on transformation. You know, the strong stance by Minister Mbalula has since been perceived to be a government interference in sport. Former Proteas legend Jacques Kallis took to social media to express his disappointment at the announcement. He labelled it encroachment by government in sports matters. Joining us to get an understanding on what it is we're dealing with is Skolele Sochelelwa, renowned sports journalist. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming through.
Good morning, Kendall. What a week. Just from that tweet, I think everything just blew off and just took a high after what Jacques Kallis had said on social media, being embarrassed to be a South African. It makes you wonder. It makes you think of all those years he represented our country, having shared a changing room with some of the black players we've seen come out of the Proteas. But, it's really disappointing for such a stalwart in our cricketing and sporting fraternity in our country.
Well, he did come out afterwards and try and water it down and explain away what he was saying. But that was quite a strong statement by a person who'd represented the country.
Yeah, quite a few people are saying things on social media and thinking an apology they can get away with it after having said an apology. But he was thinking straight when he said it. There's a lot where it comes from, what he said on specifically on the tweet about being embarrassed to be a South African. But I think those are sort of the issues that we don't need to be dwelling on, issues that we need to forget about at the moment and focus on the transformation issue that needs to happen straight away.
Is this political interference? I mean, is there any other way to get it right that all South Africans get a fair shake at playing whatever sports they desire?
There was no one else who was going to come out and deliver this ban to all these federations. There was no one else but the sports minister, and the sports minister does belong to the ruling party, which is the ANC.
The governing party. And Vili Basson himself just said that it's been 20-plus years and they'd been left to their own devices, the different sporting federations, and actually had not come to the party at all, hence their involvement.
None of them have come to the party in the early 2000s, but, recently we are seeing a change, in particular cricket. I speak of cricket because I follow it, domestic cricket and schools cricket. We do see the numbers, and we've seen Cricket South Africa having come out in the past 3-4 years, coming out with these, I don't want to say quota numbers or quota system, but restrictions, numbers to have in your teams, starting from your provincial sides to your franchise. And it's important to understand that they haven't set any numbers for the national team, but they have set numbers for the domestic sides and the franchise teams to have certain numbers in the playing teams on that 11 of the players in the playing 11.
Here's a question for you. You mentioned something about quotas. How does one deal with the language and psychology that comes with this very prickly issue of transformation in sports in South Africa? Because we keep hearing of players who do not want to be called quota players, pretty soon, I suppose, we'll be hearing of players that don't want to be called transformers or merit-selected players. How do we deal with the psychology around the stigmas attached with the labelling?
That's a different way to look at it. Players are aware that they are being given, names like quota players, the quota system, words like merit, why you should pick players on merit. You just have to understand what transformation is. As a player yourself as well, you need to understand that there's this that's going on in our country, particularly in sport, where we are going through a phase where it should have happened years ago, but it's happening now, where players are being afforded opportunities, to take part in the respective sporting codes. And, some sporting codes aren't coming to the party, and we need to call them out, and I speak of rugby in particular, which is the main one, after having seen the representation at the World Cup last year and going down as far as the franchise in the country. I can't sit here and point out a specific team, but I am aware that there is a team here in Gauteng who has fielded one black African player for 3 consecutive matches. And
we know who you're talking about. We won't mention it.
I won't mention it. Coming off the bench, and the player is phenomenal. The player is world class.
Why are we not mentioning it? Because it's out there for everybody to see on TV every weekend.
They're going to play this weekend. The Golden Lions. To me, and people, with the whole Springbok coach, after Heineke Meyer had, not being given an extension to his contract, people were mentioning Johan Ackerman, as the next coach, and then there was a big hoo-ha around Alistair Coetzee and his credentials, and they were put out, that he is qualified. He's got the stripes, he's got everything that a coach that should coach a national team should have, and together with his management team. And the one thing that Johan Ackerman is failing to do is to transform his team. The Lions are doing a superb work. They've made the Super Rugby, particularly South Africa conference, so interesting because in years gone by, Lions, averaged 1 or 2 wins in the Super Rugby a season. Mm-hmm. Now they're participating. Now they're at the top. It's now between the Sharks, the Lions, the Blue Bulls, and the Stormers. And it's someone I was chatting to the other day said they don't have the numbers in Joburg. Well, I've been to a couple of Easter festivals, during the Easter weekend.
The numbers are there.
The numbers are there, and it's not just numbers. It's players who are playing exceptional rugby, players who are playing big roles in their specific teams, and they're playing for big schools in Johannesburg.
And if truth be told, one can argue any which way one wants. You can pull whatever stats you want. If there's something that you've got your heart set on, you will make it work. Now, let's have a look at the Sevens rugby team. Surely that's a model of success. One looks at that team at any one time, it's a mixture of different races there.
When you look at that Sevens rugby team.
And they're successful.
And they've been successful for a number of years now. You've just got to... You realize that why is that not being converted to the 15-man or the Springboks itself? I think a lot of people are holding on to the brand of the Springbok itself and historically what it's meant to the people. And I think it's time now to people to come to the party. And just to your question that you were asking earlier on, should transformation start at school level? Well, Kendall, I don't want to say yes, because I would love to see 5 black players coming out of a Mzwandisile or a Vulamazbuka senior secondary school in Danzane, in Soweto, in Khayelitsha, having played all his rugby in that school, graduating from that school, going to university and representing the Springboks. Yes, the demographics in our country at the moment and the situation that is happening at grassroots level, it's going to take forever for a kid to come out of that school having finished matric, playing his rugby there, because the facilities aren't there. The infrastructure, the nutrition, the gyms, the coaching is not there. So it's good for them to get bursaries to go to these schools. But all I'm saying is that the players are there. If you look at the rugby, if you look at the cricket, our team that's going to go to the Olympics now, well transformed. The fastest guy in our country over 100 meters is black. The fastest guy over 200 meters is black. 400 meters, he's black African, So we've got to realize that if you give these black players opportunities and, people need to take accountability as well, that this needs to happen. Emotions out the window, this needs to happen, and the numbers have always been there. If you look at cricket, and people need to realize that we are not new to these sort of sports. We've been playing cricket for over 100 years, and rugby as well. But there was obviously that period where there were certain issues in our country. But after that, certain groupings had an advantage, and it's time now to realize that on its own before we move forward.
Yeah, no, apartheid is now over. It's time to get on with the program. It's time to make our country work as it should. And Vilibason, and you were saying it, that the numbers are there. We should really be tapping into the massive potential that this country has.
It's about time, Kendall, and it's going to happen. People need to come to the party, and they need to realize that it's going to happen.
Xolile, thank you so much for coming through. Really appreciate your input, and I believe that there's a lot more to talk about. This is not game over. We'll see what happens now.
We haven't touched anything.
No, absolutely. Xolile Sochilelwa, sporting journalist, giving us the lowdown on cricket and rugby transformation and what it is we can look forward to. Now, we stay with today's theme, but I need to bring Elvis in on this one because he's got a couple of comments that he can share with us. Elvis?
Of course, Kendall, that's the theme today. It's all about transformation in sport, and we're staying with today's theme. Earlier in the week, South Africa Sports Federation suffered a major blow. That's when the Sports Minister, Fikile Mbalula, announced that he has revoked the privileges of Athletics South Africa, SA Rugby, Cricket South Africa, and Netball SA to host any possible upcoming international tournaments due to their own failure, not the failure of government, their own failure to reach transformation targets. Now remember that you can send us your comments at SABC Newsroom, and let me take a look at some of those comments right away. Let's start off with this one. Sports and Music. Joster says, does the transformation in sports also apply in football? Yes, it does. It does, Joster. Tandeka says, I can't say I follow sports closely, but that comment in itself made me realize that some people still see transformation as a nice to have. This one from IG Comrade Sean says, in true sense of thought, transformation in sports by introductory of more blacks is futile in my eyes. Hashtag sports transformation, says IG Comrade Sean. Toomey says, I agree and support the notion of transformation taking place in our national sports, but banning the guys from playing? Probably you're asking to me if it's maybe not gone too far. Well, we're supposed to do this 22 years ago already, to me. Hashtag Mbalula Fikile. These are some of your comments. You can keep them coming. We'll read them as we continue on the sports program. That's our theme for today. It's all about sports and transformation. And we'll ask you the question, and Kendall will take a look at the situation a little bit further in other sporting codes as well as soon as we finish this. Now let's take a look at our Facebook page to see what's going on there. The South African Weather Service has warned that a strong cold front has made landfall in the Western Cape, and it brings with it cold conditions and the high possibility of snowfall for the Cape's highest peaks. Is going to be cold in Cape Town, people. Bring out those blankets, those jackets, everything warm. Take it out today. Then, hundreds of ordinary South Africans took to the streets yesterday, that was Wednesday, to vent their discontent over President Jacob Zuma's leadership. And then finally, Israeli fugitive Rabbi Eliezer Berlind's attorney says that they are going to appeal yesterday's judgment by the Randburg Magistrates Court to deny the rabbi bail. Now, these are all the stories that we have for you on the Facebook page. Plus, we'll also update you on the latest, what's happening with the spy tape saga in Pretoria. Court case is happening, and we'll keep you updated on that one at our 10 o'clock broadcast. So stay tuned at the top of the hour. But right now, let's take a quick break, and Kendall will be back with another follow-up discussion on transformation. You don't want to miss it.
When you're growing a business, you're not just doing it for yourself. But we know you knew that. when getting things to run smoothly means food on the table. But we know you knew that. We know success is not final. We also know failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. The courage to grow is business. We've got the advisors, products and solutions that enable you to do so.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom. Now, Sports Minister Fikile Mbalula says he'll be withdrawing funding from South Africa's major sports bodies if transformation targets are not met. The minister delivered a major blow to Athletics South Africa, South African Rugby, Cricket South Africa, Netball South Africa, announcing their rights to host possible upcoming international tournaments had been withdrawn over their failure to reach transformation targets. Now, he says the department will only reconsider the decision after the results of the 2016-2017 barometer and that a host of other punitive measures be implemented for any further non-compliance. Meanwhile, he's also stated that SAFA, the South African Football Association, has met its transformation targets. He did criticize SAFA, though, for their poor drive into making soccer an official sport in private and Model C schools. To talk to us about this other prickly subject, we're joined by Mr. Timothy Mulubi, the City Press Deputy Sports Editor. Mr. Mulubi, thank you so much for coming through.
Good morning, Kendall.
Here's a question for you. What were SAFA's targets?
I don't think you can answer that one in a one sentence because I think SAFA's mandate in the country is to develop football at the grassroots level, and I think so far they've done it, but it's interesting what the minister said about SAFA, that however,
yes,
they can't go through into the Model C or former Model C schools.
I'd like to touch on that in a little bit of time, but I think overarching all of this is soccer is played predominantly by black players, by African players indigenous to this part of the world, predominantly, yes? What does transformation mean in the world of soccer?
I think we need to start by saying transformation is not only in the boardroom. When they talk about transformation, it should filter through to the sporting field. Transformation is to see inclusivity, to see everyone included, on merit, not just because of your color. I think that's how I understand transformation to be like, everyone who deserves to get a chance must get a chance irrespective of whether you're black, white or colored, I think merit should be the key, but we've seen in other sporting codes that has not been the case, which is unfortunate that 22 years into democracy we're still talking about transformation, that other sporting codes are not transformed.
Sure, I think a lot of people would like to get an understanding of what it is that's happened to all the white players, all the Indian players. There's currently only, I believe, one Indian player who plays in the PSL, the Jomo Cosmos goalkeeper, Naika. Does transformation speak to that situation as well?
Of course it does, but we shouldn't look at the top. It starts at the bottom. I think throughout the years, I remember there was one called Brendan Augustine. He was the only Indian player in the Bafana team. Ever since, that was in the 90s or late 90s towards the millennium. But we haven't been able to entrench into that sector of the society. Why? I don't know. I can't answer that one because even white people, you look at how many white players are there in the PSL, because that's where we should start at the PSL and even below that. But I think it goes back to what the minister is saying, that SAFA has not been able to penetrate into the other market, of which I think it's imperative that they must start doing that.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because currently there are myriad schools in Johannesburg itself where they've got 5, 6, 10 rugby fields, yet there's no space for a soccer field in their program. What's that about? Why? Please tell us a little bit about what's happening with this penetration into former Model C schools, former white schools.
Obviously, those are the imbalances of the past. You know, when you go to the former Model C schools, that's where you find your cricket, rugby. It feels like where you go to townships, that's where you find soccer, because, I mean, soccer was or is still regarded as a cheap sport because you can just need a ball and just play.
Ball and some bricks and then you're sorted.
Yeah, but I think because now there's been the issue between SAFA and SASFA, which has been running schools football. Now SAFA has taken over the running of schools football from SASFA. They say no, SASFA was only concentrated on 3,000 schools, but now SAFA has targeted like 27,000 schools. Whether that is achievable, I think that's what they're saying they can do. Let's look at who runs the schools. I think the parents, the SGPs need to come to the party here.
Do you think they're willing to change?
They have to. You know, even if they are not willing to, but they have to. I think this is where SAFA must put its foot down to say, I mean, if you send your kid to a private school, you know that's where they play cricket, rugby, and athletics. That's where I think ASA needs to also infiltrate that field. But SAFA needs to sit down with these schools, SGPs, and make sure that, they introduce football. Not that I don't believe that all the kids who go to these schools, they don't want to play or they can't play football. I think they want to play, but maybe there are no opportunities. If SAFA sits down with the SGPs and the Department of Sports and the Department of Basic Education, and this is how we grow sport in the country. But so far, I think SAFA has failed in this regard.
Some people, I'd say the social paradigm, the social perspective out there is that Bafana Bafana is a completely black team now, and they're not successful. Which means that if we were to make the rugby team completely black or more black, they'd be less successful. Or the cricket team, they'd be less successful. Let's unpack that perspective, because I do know a lot of social commentators out there have got that in their minds and on the tips of their tongues.
No, that's nonsensical. It's far from the truth. Bafana have not been successful because you look at the product, you look at where they get the players. The players, do we have good players? Even if they were white players, are they good enough to play in the Bafana team? No. Let's look at England. England, is mostly white players. Are they successful? No. The last time they won the World Cup was back in 1966. So you can't use that
at home.
So you can't use that as a barometer. You look at the black cricket players. What do they do in the Proteas team? You look at Rabada now,
Bavuma,
Pangiso. Even if they don't get the same chance as their white counterparts, even in rugby, Brian Habana. You just spoke of the Sevens who are black dominated, and they've been doing well. It's unfortunate that they haven't won recently, but I think they've done.
But they were looking at them medaling at the Olympics, even they might even take this serious this year.
Of course. But I think we should not classify our players. If you are good enough to play for the national team, be it white or black or colored, you should go there on merit. I hate to see a young black kid who has what it takes to compete, not given a chance. That's very, very unfortunate. And I don't think 22 years into democracy, we could still be talking about that thing. I think that belongs to the past. And it was also unfortunate about the remarks that were said, by other players after the EPG report on Monday.
Former national players shooting their mouths off.
Of course. These are players who benefited from the past, and they are still benefiting, and they don't want to give others a chance. I don't want to see a black kid being given a chance so that he can fail. If he deserves a chance, he's on merit, then they must be given a chance, not that you just throw him there because he's black.
Mr. Timothy Mulobi from the City Press, Deputy Sports Editor, thank you so much. Your utterances, your remarks are highly valued, and I think there's more to be said, because I would like to see if we can bring you in again next week when we unpack this further.
Of course, there's still a lot to be done on this subject, and I'm very, very passionate about development in sport, and I want to see and make sure that we see football in the former Model C schools, and I'm going to make sure that I come back and tell the viewers what has been done so far.
Very good. Thank you so much. We have run out of time, and we'll be handing over to weather right now, because we need to know what's happening out there with the weather. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it raining? I've been here for hours.
Thanks very much and warm welcome. Let's take a look at your weather details. Starting off with South Africa, where we're seeing Eastern Cape covered with 30% chance of showers to 60 along the coastal regions, but over the interior and the high-lying areas, we're expecting snowfall for today. So if you are around those regions, please do take note of that. Partly cloudy skies over most parts of South Africa, but it will remain mostly sunny skies over Johannesburg and most parts of Gauteng. But moving to Limpopo, we're still expecting partly cloudy skies. Over Zimbabwe, we're seeing 30% chance of showers over the far northern parts, moving to some parts of Mozambique. Over Botswana, it will be partly cloudy to clear skies over the interior. And tomorrow, still seeing 30% chance of showers coming with that intense cold front along the eastern parts of South Africa. Moving to the interior, it will be partly cloudy with temperatures dropping to cool and cold conditions over the interior of South Africa. Temperatures will reach a maximum of 25 over Bloemfontein and 30 over Pretoria. If you will be in Harare, do expect a maximum of 26 degrees and 28 over Antananarivo with sunny skies. Over Cape Town, we're seeing a maximum of 16 degrees with 30% chance of showers to 60 and 80 over the far western parts for today. Over the interior of Eastern Cape, we're still seeing snowfall over the interior for today. Moving towards the central interior of Africa, we're seeing 30 to 60% chance of showers over most parts, but over Brazzaville, we have about 60 to 80% chance of showers that may be associated with heavy falls over those regions for today. And tomorrow, we're still seeing 30 to 60% chance of showers, but partly cloudy skies over most parts. It will be partly cloudy over Brazzaville. Over Libreville, we can expect some drizzle to 30% chance of showers. Kampala covered by 80% chance of showers. And over Addis Ababa, we'll see 30% chance of rainfall for tomorrow. Towards Addis Ababa, we're seeing a maximum of 23 degrees and 35 over Juba. If you will be in Bangui, it will be extremely hot with drizzle over those regions with a maximum of 37 degrees. Lilongwe sitting at a maximum of 26 degrees and 30 over Dar es Salaam. If you will be in Kigali, do expect a maximum of 24 degrees with 30 to 60% chance of showers. Over the eastern parts, we're seeing Mecca covered by 30% chance of showers. Port of Sudan, Sana'a, Djibouti, and Baghdad as well. But over most parts of the Middle East, we're seeing partly cloudy skies with few chances of rainfall. Over the Sahara Desert, just partly cloudy skies to clear skies for tomorrow. And today, Nika will be covered by 30% chance of showers again for tomorrow. And Port of Sudan, Damascus, and Baghdad will be partly cloudy to clear skies for tomorrow. Temperatures over these regions will reach a maximum of 29 over Damascus and 23 over Baghdad, 37 if you will be in Riyadh. Mecca, extremely hot at a maximum of 38 degrees. And if you will be in Tripoli, do expect a maximum of 26 with partly cloudy skies. That is all from the weather desk. Now Yando.
A very good afternoon. You're watching the Midday Report.
Lunchtime news amplified.
But for now, this is what they call home. Their hope to shift to a higher ground seems to be against the tide.
Midday Report provides you with more than just news stories.
I just want Port Elizabeth to know that they own a world-class theatre.
Good afternoon. You're with the news at 1 in the headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. This is News Live. I'm Natasha Thorpe. Let's take a quick look at what's coming up in your headlines.
Good afternoon and welcome to A View from the House.
For all things news, tune in to Midday Report weekdays at 12 noon, only on the SABC News channel.
In Bupilong, we celebrate those who take strides doing good and changing the world.
I really think that education has to be revisited, and it's an integral part of teaching young people skills of the future.
There's always light at the end of the tunnel.
I think that the treatment should be made available, actually, because it's costly. Growth hormones are very costly.
Where there is a challenge, we bring hope.
I'm alive. And the brain tumor is gone.
Join your host Buleng Mulabati every Friday at 17:30 for more uplifting stories.
It's Friday, it's the weekend, my lady, the 29th of April 2016. This is Newsroom on SABC News, Channel 404. If you've just joined us, Jumbo Africa. And a very warm welcome as we broadcast live from our Auckland Park studios in Johannesburg to the rest of the African continent. I'm Elvis Presland.
And I'm Renee Vest, and we'll be with you until 12 o'clock. We're also streaming live on YouTube with the entire show available on our YouTube channel. Earlier in our show today, we had a closer look at transformation in sports. This after Minister of Sports Bukile Mbalula imposed penalties on 4 big sporting federations, revoking their rights to bid for and host any major international tournaments.
So the focus this morning is on sports and transformation, and we're asking you that question. On your screen right now, should transformation in sport be enforced in South African schools? That's the question we pose to you. You can let us know. You heard some of the arguments a little bit earlier on, and you can let us know what's on your mind on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom, as well as on our Facebook page. But first, let's take a look at your news headlines. In Pretoria, the North Gauteng High Court will today rule on President Jacob Zuma's spy tape charges. And it's all systems go for the Economic Freedom Fighters manifesto launch at the Orlando Stadium in Soweto tomorrow. And President Jacob Zuma yesterday bestowed the national orders to South Africans and foreign nationals to acknowledge their sacrifice in improving the country. Those are all your headlines, but before we get to the news with Renee, let's find out from Kendall Makamate what's happening on the sports front. A very good morning, Kendall.
Good morning to the both of you. Now, besides the transformation in sports story, we've also got quite a lot that's been happening on the sports field in the arena of the action. And this is what we've got for you in the sports today. In Super Rugby, the Lions prepare for a massive battle up front with the all-powerful Hurricanes.
1-0 Villarreal in stoppage time. Liverpool looking for the flag that doesn't come.
Liverpool fall foul to a last-minute goal by Villarreal in their first leg Europa League semi-final.
Expect them all to bounce back, especially Lewis, and it's going to be a great battle against him as always.
And Formula One Championship leader Nico Rosberg is under no illusion that his teammate and chief rival will be trying to bounce back after a string of failures. That is what we've got for you in the sport in about 20 minutes or so. Be sure to stick around for that. Back to the main desk for the news.
Thank you very much, Kendall. The Pretoria High Court will today rule on President Jacob Zuma's spy tape charges. A full bench of the North Gauteng High Court will hand down judgment in the matter relating to the dropping of the 783 charges of corruption levelled against President Zuma. The outcome of the court's ruling could potentially see corruption charges against President Zuma reinstated. In March, the court reserved judgment in the application to have the decision to discontinue the prosecution against President Zuma reviewed and set aside. The Democratic Alliance argues that the decision taken by then-acting National Director of Public Prosecutions, Mokotedi Mpshe, was irrational and unreasonable. Meanwhile, DA leader Musi Maimane says the party will take this matter to the highest court in the land if need be. He was speaking in Limpopo, where he's been on the campaign trail.
A jovial crowd as they welcomed Maimane in Westernburg outside Polokwane. The DA leader urged residents to vote for change in the upcoming local government elections. His attention, however, turned to the Pretoria High Court case judgment on the reinstatement of charges of corruption against President Jacob Zuma.
We fought this thing for 5 years. It spent us a lot of money. I'm going to court. And you know, I beat the ANC at the Spite as a SMS case. We took them to court in the Constitutional Court for Nkandla. We beat them there. I'm expecting that we win. No Maganja. We are going to fight it to Concord.
The DA launched its manifesto last week.
ANC branches in the KwaZulu region north of Durban have thrown their support behind President Jacob Zuma to complete his full term. The declaration was made during the party's cadres forum in Stago. The ANC in Mpumalanga, led by David Mabuza, says the party's structures in that province have made peace with the president's apology. All three provincial leadership structures have accepted the president's apology for the frustration and confusion caused by the Nkandla spending fiasco. But Gauteng leaders are not convinced it's enough to mitigate the political damage caused by the saga. The Constitutional Court's findings that Zuma failed to uphold, defend and respect the Constitution has sparked calls from within and outside the governing party for Zuma to step down. It's all systems go for the Economic Freedom Fighters Manifesto launch at the Orlando Stadium in Soweto tomorrow. The party will for the first time be running in the local government elections in August. In 2014 national elections, the EFF got 25 seats in Parliament, making it the third largest party in the country.
Last-minute touches ahead of the party's first manifesto launch. Orlando Stadium in Soweto can accommodate 40,000 people. And the EFF says, come Saturday, the stadium will be filled with red beret to hear the party's election promises from the Commander-in-Chief himself.
We are the only different thing that's going to happen to these elections this year. There's nothing else. There's nothing new except the EFF in these elections. There's nothing else that is new in South African politics except the EFF. Soon enough, it will be in government, and soon enough, it will be in the economy.
The EFF says its manifesto will speak to issues such as unemployment, housing, and service delivery. SABC News, Soweto.
A new labour federation representing over 1 million workers will be launched this weekend. The federation, formed by NUMSA and other splinter groups from COSATU, have vowed to forge ahead for the unity of workers. The Workers' Summit, is expected to be launched at Malareng Stadium in Simbisa on Gauteng's East Rand on Sunday.
Now, there you have it. That is your news for now. The North Gauteng High Court, as you know, will today rule on President Jacob Zuma's spy tape charges. A full bench will sit down to judge in the matter relating to the dropping of 783 charges of corruption levelled against President Jacob Zuma. For the latest on the spy tape's judgment, we now cross live to the court.
On behalf of the applicant,
may it please the court, my lord, I appear on behalf of the third respondent.
Please the court, I appear on behalf of the first and second respondents.
Yes. Thank you. This is the judgment of the court, meaning that it has been prepared by us. We have decided to read it out because we realize that the public has got an interest in it. So we are not going to just read the orders. And the judgment is as follows. Introduction. This is a review application launched on the 7th April 2004 by the Democratic Alliance, DA, the official political opposition party in the Republic of South Africa. The DA asks this court to grant the following relief. Quote, reviewing, correcting, and setting aside the decision of the first respondent taken on or about the 6th of April 2009 to discontinue the criminal prosecution of Mr. Zuma in accordance with charges contained in an indictment of 27 December 2007, declaring that the decision of the first respondent referred to in paragraph 2 above to be inconsistent with the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa of 1966 and invalid. The appropriate order of cost is also sought. The respondents in opposing this application are as follows. The first respondent is the Acting National Director of Public Prosecutions, ANDPP, who was at the time Advocate Mokotedi Mche SC, Mr. Mche. The second respondent is the head of the Directorate of Special Operations, DSO, namely Advocate Leonard McCarthy, Mr. McCarthy. At the time when this application was launched, the DSO was still operational. It has since been disbanded. The third respondent is Mr. Jacob Gedleyisekisa Zuma, Mr. Zuma, the current President of the Republic of South Africa. At the time this application was instituted, Mr. Zuma was not yet the President of the Republic of South Africa. In addition to the respondents, an entity known as the Society for the Protection of Our Constitution was admitted to the proceedings as amicus curiae by authority of the court order dated 18 September 2015. On or about 28th November 2007, a corporate decision to prosecute Mr. Zuma afresh was made by Mr. Mche, Mr. McCarthy, and the prosecution team. Previously, charges preferred by the then National Director of Prosecution, Advocate Pikoli, were struck from the roll by the KwaZulu-Natal Division of the High Court during September 2007. The decision to charge Mr. Zuma in November 2007 was coincidentally taken at a period when the African National Congress, ANC, was about to hold its National Electoral Conference scheduled for 16 to 20 December 2017 at Polokwane. 2007, sorry. A president of the ANC was to be elected at the said conference. The main contestants for presidency were Mr. Zuma and the former President Mbeki. The timing of the service of the indictment on Mr. Zuma became an issue. The prosecution team, in particular Mr. Downer, wanted same to be served immediately, regardless of the pending ANC conference. The view of Mr. Mche was that service should be effected in early 2008 after the Polokwane conference was held, so as not to present an appearance of political interference by the NPA in influencing the outcome of the leadership contest. Mr. McCarthy's view changed and he wanted service to be delayed until after the conference. The respondents' main reason for opposing this application is that Mr. McCarthy unduly influenced and interfered with the service of the indictment for political reasons. On the 1st of April 2009, Mr. Mche took a decision to discontinue the prosecution against Mr. Zuma and announced it publicly on the 6th of April 2009. The said decision to discontinue the prosecution triggered this application. It took almost 7 years since this review application was launched for it to be heard by this court. The reason for the delay is, amongst others, that there were two main interlocutory applications which emanated from this review application following each other. We briefly referred to the said applications. The first interlocutory application concerned a challenge that was raised by ANDPP and Mr. Zuma in the Gauteng High Court Division, Pretoria, before Judge Renshot. The ANDPP and Mr. Zuma contended that the DA did not have locus standi to bring this review application, raised the reviewability of the decision of Mr. Mse and the question whether the ANDPP was compelled to furnish the record of his decision to the DA. The decision of Judge Renshot granting the order in favor of the ANDPP and Mr. Zuma was reversed on appeal by the Supreme Court of Appeal, SCA, in the matter of DA and others versus Acting National Director of Public Prosecutions and others. In the matter of Democratic Alliance versus Acting National Director of Public Prosecutions and others, which came before Judge Matopo in the Gauteng Division, Pretoria, the court had to determine whether the transcript of the conversations as recorded in the tapes should be disclosed in terms of Rule 53 of the Rules of the High Court. The SCA upheld the judgment of Judge Matopo that the transcript of the recordings should be disclosed and further ordered that the transcript of the recordings be redacted in order to protect the confidentiality concerning the representations made by Mr. Zuma to the ANDPP. Now dealing with the background. The decision to charge and prosecute Mr. Zuma was preceded by a protracted investigation that started in 2001. Mr. Mche was appointed as the ANDPP on 29 September 2007 after Mr. Pikoli had been suspended. The prosecution team investigating the case of Mr. Zuma consisted of Advocate Downer SC, Advocate A. Steinbeck, Advocate George Baloyi, and Advocate Deploy. The team and Mr. McCarthy were also advised by two private senior counsel, namely Advocate Ving Trengove SC and Advocate Breitenbach SC. From November 2007, Mr. McCarthy kept Mr. Mche and his deputies in the NPA updated about the investigation of the matter of Mr. Zuma. In preparation to finalize the charges, the application for centralization of charges in terms of Section 111 of the Criminal Procedure Act 51 of 1977 was submitted to Mr. Mche on the 20th of November 2007. The prosecution team briefed Mr. Mche and deputies on 29th November 2007, and the decision to prosecute was finally approved. It is common cause that the decision to prosecute Mr. Zuma afresh was a corporate decision at the time. In the beginning of December 2007, a report in terms of Section 33 of the National Prosecution Authority Act 32 of 1988 was submitted to Minister Mabanda, the then Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development. Mr. Mche and the Minister had a conversation on the 4th of December 2007, where it is stated that the Minister raised concern regarding the safety and stability of the country should the indictment be served before the Polokwane Conference. On the 5th of December 2007, a day after the meeting with the Minister, Mr. Mche informed Mr. Downer that the service of the indictment would be delayed until January 2008. The indictment was served on the 28th of December 2007 on Mr. Zuma. In June 2008, Mr. Zuma launched an application in terms of Section 179 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa in the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Division of the High Court for a review of the decision taken to prosecute him. On the 12th of December 2008, Judge Nicholson ruled in favor of Mr. Zuma. The ANDPP challenged Judge Nicholson's judgment on appeal in the SCA. On the 12th of January 2009, the SCA overturned Judge Nicholson's judgment. On the 10th of February 2009, the NPA received written representations from the legal representatives of Mr. Zuma. These representations were made on behalf of Mr. Zuma, but Mr. Zuma did not confirm the representations under oath. We pause to mention that the national and provincial elections were scheduled to take place on the 22nd of March 2009, and the inauguration of the President of the Republic of South Africa would take place on the 9th of May 2009. On the 20th of February 2009, Mr. Zuma's legal representatives made further oral representations to Mr. Mche and his deputies, as well as Mr. Ngwengwe. According to Mr. Zinyati's notes forming part of the record of the proceedings, the Browse Mall matter was discussed at this meeting. The Browse Mall report was released in November 2007 by the Joint Standing Committee. The report revealed an unofficial attempt to besmirch the person and integrity of Mr. Zuma. Mr. McCarthy was implicated in the compiling of the report and was openly criticized by the committee, which recommended that action be taken against him. No action was taken against Mr. McCarthy. On the 3rd of March 2009, the prosecution team considered the representations made by Mr. Zuma's legal representatives and submitted a memorandum to Mr. Mche dealing with both the written and oral representations, giving detailed reasons for the rejection of these representations. A material suggestion at the time was that the oral representations should be reduced to writing in an affidavit. This never took place. During the 6th to the 16th of March 2009, Mr. Zuma's legal representatives allowed Mr. Mzinyati and Mr. Hofmeyer to listen to the tapes of the intercepted telephone and SMS conversations between Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Muta, as well as between Mr. McCarthy and the Minister Mabanda, and between Mr. McCarthy and various other parties. In the meeting held on the 18th of March 2009, where Mr. Mche was also present, the NPA management informed the prosecution team of the contents of the oral representations by Mr. Zuma's legal representatives and came to the conclusion that they had a good case to be pursued against Mr. Zuma. There are two letters prepared in March 2009 in consideration of the representations and in which a response is prepared to Mr. Zuma's attorneys by the prosecution team and Mr. Mche. These letters form part of the record of proceedings. Annex D18 is a draft that was sent to Advocate Trengove SC to settle, and Annex D7 is a letter settled that was to be sent to Mr. Hali in response to the written oral representations. It is not clear if the response was delivered to Mr. Hali. The DA became aware of the legal representatives of Mr. Zuma and made representations to the NPA concerning the pending prosecution. They also requested to make representations. On the 20th of March 2009, Mr. Mche informed the DA as follows, I quote, You are most welcome to make written representations to me. I must, however, request that it reaches me on or before the 27th of March 2009, as this is the date I have set for myself to apply my mind to all the information supplied and still to be supplied. You will appreciate that due to the wide publicity in the matter, it is in the interest of all concerned that I consider the representations as speedily as possible, unquote. On the same date, and after the prosecution team had received Advocate Trengo's SC's opinion and or advice, they informed Mr. Mche of the essence of it. The gist of the information submitted to Mr. Mche is recorded as follows. I quote, he advised against acceding to the representations. The proper forum for evaluating the allegations and their relevance to fair trial was the court. As envisaged in the permanent stay arrangements that we had already settled with the defense and the judge president, unquote. On the 23rd of March 2009, Mr. Mche informed the DA that he was not at liberty to adhere to their request to have insight into Mr. Zuma's representations and the representations he had made confidentially and without prejudice. On 30 March 2009, a meeting took place between Mr. Mche, his deputies, Mr. Ngwengwe, and the prosecution team. According to Mr. Mzinyati's notes, which were recorded at the meeting, Mr. Mche indicated that on 1st April 2009, he would make his decision. Mr. Mche did not indicate as to the reason for making a decision on the 1st of April 2009. Mr. Mche said he was satisfied that they had a strong case on the merits of the case. Mr. Mche, his deputies, and the prosecution team had no doubt that the prosecution would proceed. Importantly, at that stage, Mr. Mche had been informed of the contents of the intercepted messages between Mr. Mnuga and Mr. McCarthy. On 30th March 2009, Mr. Mche addressed a letter to Mr. McCarthy informing him about the audio recordings regarding the contents of the tapes. Mr. McCarthy replied on 31st March 2009 requesting more information regarding the intercepted communications so that he could deal with the allegations against him. At the time, Mr. Mche had indicated to the deputies that he wanted Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Nuga's responses to the tapes before making a decision. Prior to 31st March 2009, Mr. Mche had been reluctant to listen to the tapes. This is stated in the ANDPP's answering affidavit, deposed to by Mr. Hofmeyer and confirmed by Mr. Mche. On 31st March 2009, the deputies and Mr. Mche personally listened to the tapes in the evening. This after Mr. Hofmeyer and Mr. Mzinyati had previously reported to Mr. Mche and informed him of his deputies as to the contents of the tapes. On 1st April 2009, the following day, Mr. Mche met with his deputies and informed them that he had been disturbed by what he had heard on the tapes. He had decided to discontinue the prosecution. The record of the proceedings reflect that Mr. Downer recorded on 2nd April 2009 that Mr. Hofmeyer was of the view that the prosecution should be stopped. But both the prosecution team and the other deputies were of the view that the prosecution should continue. It is clear from the memorandum that on the 2nd April 2009, the prosecution team had not been informed of the decision already taken to discontinue the prosecution. On the 3rd of April 2009, Mr. Downer was still of the same opinion, but unaware of the decision already made by Mr. Mche on the 1st of April 2009. He opined as follows, I quote, the recommendations should be declined along the lines of our draft letter to Mr. Hardy, which has now been considered, unquote. Mr. Downer further set out the two questions as advised by Advocate Trengo, SC, the legal advisor to the prosecution team. These are, I quote, can I say that my decision to prosecute was not improperly influenced by Advocate McCarthy's improper motives? A simple sine qua non test can be applied here. And if not, am I now still satisfied with ex post facto knowledge of Advocate McCarthy's shenanigans that the decision was on the merits the correct one, unquote. On 6 April 2009, Mr. Mche met with the prosecution team led by Mr. Downer to inform them of the decision he had made to discontinue the prosecution. He later publicly announced the decision taken on 1st April 2009 to discontinue the criminal prosecution, stating his reasons in the press release. Mr. Downer, the leader of the prosecution team, recalls later in the memorandum dated 9 April 2009 as follows, I quote, the legal aspects of the motivation were not given to us for comment beforehand. In the few minutes before the press conference, it was impossible to digest and comment on the legal justification given for the decision, nor was there the opportunity utilized to run this reasoning past two counsel who were available and eminently qualified to advise on these issues, unquote. On the 7th of April 2009, the DA launched the present application. On 8 April 2009, the charges against Mr. Zuma and him were formally withdrawn by the KwaZulu-Natal Division of the High Court. I now give with reasons for Mr. Mche's decision of the 1st of April 2009. The reasons to disclose the prosecution, the reasons to discontinue the prosecution against Mr. Zuma was stated by Mr. Mche in an address to the media on 6 April 2009. In essence, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. Nguka, and others are alleged to have manipulated the timing of the envisaged service of the indictment of Mr. Zuma against the latter for political reasons. The service of the indictment was supposed to be used to disadvantage Mr. Zuma in his contest against Mr. Mbeki for the presidency of the ANC. In announcing his decision to discontinue the prosecution, Mr. Mche stated thus, I quote, all members of the senior management and the prosecution team participated in this discussion, and ultimately I take full responsibility for the decision I made, unquote. He further said, I quote, the representations submitted by the legal representatives pertain to the following issues: the substantive merits, the fair trial defenses, the practical implications and considerations of continued prosecution, the policy aspects militating against prosecution. I need to state up front that we would not find anything with regard to the first three grounds that militate against a continuation of the prosecution, unquote. Mr. Mshe continued to state as follows, I quote, in the present matter, the conduct consists of the timing of the charging of the accused. Even if the prosecution itself is conducted by the prosecution team is not tainted, the fact that Mr. McCarthy, who was head of the DSO and was in charge of the matter at all times and managed it almost on a daily basis, manipulated the legal process for purposes outside the extraneous to the prosecution itself. It is not so much the prosecution itself that is tainted, but the legal process itself. Mr. McCarthy used the legal process for the purpose other than that which the process was designed to serve. That is, for collateral and illicit purposes. It does not matter that the team acted properly, honestly, fairly, and justly throughout. Mr. McCarthy's conduct amounts to a serious abuse of process and offends one's sense of justice. Mr. Mshe concludes as follows, I quote, in the light of the above, I have come to the difficult conclusion that it is neither possible nor desirable for the NPA to continue with the prosecution of Mr. Zuma, unquote. Of importance, he also stated that, I quote, let me also state for the record that the prosecution team itself has recommended that the prosecution should continue even if the allegations are true, and that it should be left to a court of law to decide whether to stop the prosecution, unquote. There are thus three important decisions at the center of this review, namely, the first decision was that of the NPA and DSO to prosecute Mr. Zuma. This decision was taken on about the 28th of November 2007. The second decision of 6 December 2007 concerns the timing of the service of the indictment on Mr. Zuma. This is the decision which concerns the alleged misconduct by Mr. McCarthy. The question raised herein are who took the decision, when, and when. And the third decision of 1st April 2009 is the one made by Mr. Mshe to discontinue the prosecution of Mr. Zuma. According to Mr. Mshe, the reason for this decision emanates from the alleged misconduct of Mr. McCarthy as stated above. It is this decision that is the subject of this review. The main reason for the 1st April 2009 decision to discontinue the prosecution is captured succinctly on the bottom of page 4 and the top of page 5 of Mr. Mshe's statement, when he opines as follows about how the abuse of process may occur on its own. I quote, it will not be possible to give the accused a fair trial, or it will offend one's sense of justice, integrity, and propriety to continue with the trial of the accused in the particular case. Discontinuation is not a disciplinary process undertaken in order to express one's disapproval of abuse of process. It is an expression of one's sense of justice and propriety. In brackets, C. Connolly versus DPP, 1964, AC 1254, close bracket, unquote. It is against this background that the court now tends to deal with the grounds of review of Mr. Mpie's decision to discontinue the prosecution of Zuma. I now deal with the DA's grounds of review. When this review application was launched on the 17th of April 2009, the grounds of review supporting the relief sought were initially based on the provision of Section 6 of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, PAJA, in line with the decision of Battlestar Fishing Pty Ltd versus Minister of Environmental Affairs and Tourism and others. The reviewability of a decision to discontinue a prosecution was considered and dealt with by NAFSA JA in the matter of DA versus acting and DPP and another. After considering the question, the SCA concluded that a review of the decision to discontinue prosecution can be reviewable on the grounds of legality and irrationality. This view was further endorsed in the matter of the NDPP versus Freedom Under Law, where the court stated in paragraph 29 as follows, I quote, "As demonstrated by the numerous cases since decided on the basis of legality principle, the principle acts as a safety net to give the court some degree of control over action that does not qualify as administrative under PAJA, but nonetheless involves the exercise of public power. Currently, it provides a more limited basis of review than PAJA. Why I say currently imposed is because it is accepted that legality is an evolving concept in our jurisprudence. This full creative potential will be developed in the context-driven and incremental manner. But for the present purposes, it can be accepted with confidence that it includes review on grounds of irrationality and on the basis that the decision maker did not act in accordance with the empowering statute. Open bracket, see Democratic Alliance and another. This is Acting National Director of Public Prosecutions and others, 2012, Volume 3, SA 486, SCA at paragraphs 28 and 30. I now deal with rationality as a ground of review. In paragraph 22 of its judgment, I'll repeat, in paragraph 32 of the judgment of the Constitutional Court in Albert versus Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation and others, explains rationality review as being really concerned with the evaluation of a relationship between means and ends. The relationship connecting or linking between the means employed to achieve a particular purpose on the one hand and the purpose or end itself. In paragraph 51, the Constitutional Court held thus, I quote, "But where the decision is challenged on the grounds of rationality, courts are obliged to examine the means selected to determine whether they are rationally related to the objective sought to be achieved. What must be stressed is that the purpose of the inquiry is to determine not whether there are other means that could have been used, but whether the means selected are rationally related to the objective sought to be achieved. And if, objectively speaking, they are not, they fall short of the standard demanded by the Constitution," unquote. Rationality involves substantive and procedural issues. It follows, therefore, that both the process by which the decision is made, the means, and the decision itself must be rationally related. This principle was confirmed by the Constitutional Court in DA versus President of the Republic of South Africa. In the matter of freedom under law versus National Director of Public Prosecutions and others, Judge Murphy dealt with the question of review grounds under PAJA of a decision to prosecute. This matter went on appeal to the SCA, where the court held that the decision to discontinue a prosecution or not to prosecute can be reviewable not under PAJA, but on the basis of the principle of legality and irrationality. Importantly, further, that in deference to the doctrine in separation of powers, it is not appropriate for a court seized with a review application and upon setting aside the decision to step into the shoes of the prosecution and grant orders and directives as to how the prosecution should be carried out from that point onwards. The DA subsequently amended its grounds of review based on PAJA and narrowed them to the grounds of irrationality and legality in line with the authorities cited above. The applicant and respondents' counsel, by agreement, mainly based their arguments on the ground of irrationality. The parties did not present arguments relating to the declaratory relief sought by the applicant that the decision of Mr. Mche was unconstitutional. I now deal with respondents' contentions. It was argued on behalf of the first and second respondents, the ANDPP and DSO, in essence, that having regard to Brown's Mold report criticizing Mr. McCarthy's conduct of leaking information to the media and the contents of the transcript, Mr. Mche was justified in deciding to discontinue the prosecution of Mr. Zuma and that his decision was rational. Mr. Zuma's counsel argued that even if the merits of state's case were strong, the decision to discontinue was rational and justified because, according to the contents of the recorded conversations, the NPA's independence would be affected and it would be seen to be meddling with political decisions. Counsel further submitted that the fact that the plan of Mr. McCarthy to negatively influence the election of Mr. Zuma as president of the ANC was unsuccessful was immaterial. The abuse by Mr. McCarthy was of such a serious nature that the decision not to prosecute was rational. In our view, the alleged conduct of Mr. McCarthy, as appears from the transcript of the recorded conversations, if proven, constitutes a serious breach of law and prosecutorial policy. It is not even necessary to refer to his role in the Brown's Mold report, for which it seems he was not admonished. His conduct, as alleged in the transcript, again, as if proven, certainly calls for intervention. This will involve an inquiry into allegations and, if need be, also censure by the court of law. On being informed by Mr. Hoffmeyer and Mr. Mzinyati about the content of recordings, Mr. Mche surprisingly did not immediately confront Mr. McCarthy and his predecessor, Mr. Nuka, about the allegations. He only did that on the 30th of March, 2 days before he took the decision to discontinue the prosecution. Both officials, who were no longer in the employ of the prosecution authority, requested access to the content of the tape recordings before they could comment. This was a reasonable request. Mr. Mche, however, felt it unnecessary to wait for their response and proceeded to make a decision on the 1st of April 2009. He thus made a half-hearted attempt at investigating and verifying the allegations before he took a decision. He had thus reached the cardinal rule of audi alteram part, that is, hearing the other side before making an intervention. Mr. Mche, in his media address, concedes that the substantive merits and the fair trial defenses of the prosecution of Mr. Zuma were not tainted by the alleged conduct of Mr. McCarthy. However, the form of censure Mr. Mche chose by discontinuing the prosecution failed to demonstrate a connection or linkage to the alleged conduct of Mr. McCarthy. That is the essence of this review. The submissions of Respondents' Counsel have similarly, in our view, not addressed the question of this required connection or linkage necessary to determine if the decision meets the test of rationality. The amicus curiae argued that the DA should have brought the review application in terms of the provision of FAJA, and that bringing the application in terms of irrationality is unconstitutional. It was further argued that the decision to prosecute or not to prosecute is by law taken by the Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions, not the National Director of Public Prosecutions. Therefore, it argued Mr. Mche could not have had the authority to take the decision as alleged. The submissions of the amicus curiae are clearly way off the mark and not supported by any decided cases. Writing for the SCA in the matter of NDPP versus Zuma, Supra, Harms, DP explained the powers of the NDPP in reviewing a decision to prosecute in paragraphs 70, 71, and 75 thus, I quote, I therefore conclude that section 179 bracket 5 bracket D does not apply to reconsideration by the NDPP of his own earlier decisions, but is limited to a review of a decision made by a DPP or some other prosecutor for whom a DPP is responsible. The head of the DSO is a post-constitution creation and is not a DPP but a deputy NDPP in terms of the NPA Act. You see section 7 bracket 3. Further, the fact that he joined in the decision making does not mean that the decision is no longer that of the NDPP. If the argument were correct, it would mean that the Mche decision was also not one made by the NDPP and would fall beyond the provision and destroy the basis of Mr. Kemp's whole argument because it too was made jointly with the head of the DSO. In addition, as held by the Constitutional Court, as soon as the matter had been struck from the roll by Mr. Msimang J., the criminal proceedings were terminated and the proceedings were no longer pending. Removal of a matter from the roll aborts the trial proceedings. The effect of this is that what went before Mr. Mche's decision was spent and a new decision to prosecute was required. The MCHE decision was not simply a review of Mr. Nguga's decision, which was no longer extant. On these facts, Section 1795, bracket 5, bracket D, had, irrespective of whichever interpretation is correct, no application, and Mr. Zuma's reliance on it was misplaced, unquote. In regard to the submission that the DA should have brought the application for review in terms of PAJA as submitted by Mr. Omar, we refer to the decision of DA versus Acting NDPP Supra and the NDPP versus Freedom Under Law Supra, where the two judgments deal extensively with the ground of review of a prosecution under PAJA and in terms of the principle of constitutional legality. It needs to be mentioned that the amicus curiae disappointingly failed to add any value to these proceedings. I now deal with rationality of the decision and abuse of process. The NDPP derives her authority from Section 9 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, Act of 1996, which, I'll repeat, the NDPP derives her authority from Section 179 of the Constitution of South Africa, read with the national legislation enacted in terms of Section 1797 being the NPA Act. More specifically, Section 22 thereof, which deals with the powers of the National Director as well as the regulations dealing with prosecutorial policy. The prohibited conduct of NPA officials, including offenses and penalties, are dealt with under Section 41. The National Director of Public Prosecutions is also empowered to issue policy directives which serve as a guide to prosecution. Part 2 of the prosecution policy directives, dated 1st June 2014, deals with the prosecution authority, while Part 5 thereof deals with withdrawal of cases and stopping prosecutions. The NDPP and all officials of the prosecution are required to act within the confines of these legal instruments. One of the objectives of the legal framework is to protect and preserve the integrity of the prosecution authority and its processes. The objective sought to be achieved through the decision to discontinue the prosecution of Mr. Zuma was, in Mr. Mche's view, to protect the integrity of the NPA and its processes. Thus, the decision to discontinue the prosecution was, according to Mr. Mche, a response to the alleged abuse of power by Mr. McCartney, when the latter allegedly manipulated the timing of the service of the indictment on Mr. Zuma as a tool to achieve a political advantage for President Mbeki prior to the election of the leadership of the ANC at Polokwane Conference. In the 12-page media address announcing his decision to discontinue the prosecution of Mr. Zuma, Mr. Mche relies on the abuse of process doctrine. The DA submits that the words used by Mr. Mche in his statement have a striking resemblance to those adopted by Seagrove J. of the High Court of Hong Kong in the matter of HKSAR versus Lee Ming T. This decision was, however, overturned on appeal, where the appeal court stated as follows, I quote, "Although the question is debatable, the better view is that an abuse of process does not exist independently of and antecedently to the exercise of judicial discretion. The judicial decision that there is an abuse of process which requires the grant of a stay itself of a stay is itself the result of the exercise of judicial discretion. It is for the judge to weigh countervailing considerations of policy and justice, and then, in the exercise of the discretion, decide whether there is an abuse of process which requires a stay, unquote. In the same media address, Mr. Mse also referred to the British case of R versus Latif as authority for the application of the abuse of process doctrine. The court on page 360, paragraph H to J, and page 361, paragraphs D to E states thus, I quote, "If the court always refuses to stay such proceedings, the perception will be that the court condones criminal conduct and malpractice by law enforcement agencies. That would undermine public confidence in the criminal justice system and bring it into disrepute. On the other hand, if the court were always to stay proceedings in such cases, it would incur the reproach that it is failing to protect the public from serious crime. The witnesses of both extreme positions leaves only one principal solution. The court has a discretion. It has to perform a balancing exercise," unquote. On page 361, paragraphs D to E, the court said, I quote, "General guidance as to how the discretion should be exercised in particular circumstances will not be useful, but it is possible to say that in a case such as the present, the judge must weigh in the balance between public interest in ensuring that those that are charged with grave crimes should be tried and the competing public interest in not conveying the impression that the courts will adopt the approach that the end justifies any means," unquote. In making reference to this case, Mr. Mshe surprisingly omitted to mention that the courts in both HKSAR appeal and the Latif matters were of the view that the determination of the principles of abuse of process was an exercise for a court of law and not an extrajudicial pronouncement. Mr. Mshe disregarded, without giving reasons, the recommendation of the prosecution team that even if the allegations regarding Mr. McCarthy are true, the decision to stop the prosecution was to be made by a court of law. The court in Latif matter also mentioned, the court in Latif matter also held that the application of the abuse of process involved a balancing of two imperatives. The one imperative is where the court does not act on misconduct and malpractice by law enforcement agencies, a failure to do so will raise an ear of the public. The second imperative is the instance where the trial is discontinued, such as in this case. In such an event, the criminal justice system as a whole, and not only the NPA, will incur the reproach that it is failing to protect the public from serious crime. Mr. Mshe disingenuously omitted to consider or deal with this second imperative in his media address. The manner in which the prosecution authority must approach an allegation of abuse of process doctrine was also dealt with by the SCA in the NDPP versus Zuma, where the court held us, I quote, "A prosecution is not wrongful merely because it is brought for an improper purpose. It will only be wrongful if, in addition, reasonable and probable grounds for prosecuting are absent, something not alleged by Mr. Zuma and which in any event can only be determined once criminal proceedings have been concluded, unquote. The court of law is the appropriate forum to deal with the abuse of process doctrine, not extrajudicial process. Prior to 1st April 2009, and after he was briefed about the contents of the tapes, Mr. Mche subscribed to the view advocated by Mr. Downer and the prosecution team that the allegations raised in the tape and the representation by Mr. Zuma's legal team must be subjected to judicial process. If anything, to test the veracity thereof, he concedes in the press statement that the prosecution team held this view, but on 1st April 2009, he inexplicably and irrationally abandoned this view. In the March 2000 draft letter to Mr. Hali referred to Mr. Mche, and the NPA official expressed the view that the matters raised in the representations made on behalf of Mr. Zuma must be dealt with by a court of law during the trial. It is interesting that Mr. Mche decided to discontinue the prosecution, although in March 2009, Mr. Mche and the prosecution team recorded the following, I quote, "I do not consider that this matter in itself will prevent our client from having," I repeat the quotation, "I do not consider that this matter in itself will prevent your client from having a fair trial. If your client believes I am wrong in this assessment, then he will have an opportunity to persuade the court in his intended permanent stay application or during the criminal trial itself," unquote. In February 2009, the KwaZulu-Natal Division of the High Court issued an order by agreement between the parties that Mr. Zuma would file papers for a permanent stay prosecution on 18 May 2009. This meant that such an application had to be filed in about 6 weeks' time. Mr. Mche does not state why he could not wait for a further 6 weeks for the application for stay of prosecution to be filed so that the court could ultimately deal with it. The matter has a protracted history since 2007, and we do not understand why Mr. Mche wanted to finalize the matter within a month after receiving representations from Mr. Zuma's legal representatives. The legal authorities cited above, of which Mr. Mche should have been aware or so advised, do not support the decision taken by him in an instance such as this one under review, where the abuse of process doctrine is applied in an extrajudicial exercise of public power. When the prosecution against an accused is discontinued. In this instance, the basis of the alleged abuse of process rested on legally untested allegations which were unrelated to the trial process and the charges. It is thus our view that Mr. Mche, by not referring the complaint of abuse of process and the related allegations against Mr. McCarthy to court, rendered his decision irrational. In the answering affidavit by Mr. Hofmeyer, confirmed by Mr. Mche, it is stated that when he, Mr. Mche, admitted to having told Mr. Downer that the decision was his and no one else, he was deliberately withholding the version that he had been influenced by Mr. McCarthy to delay the service of the indictment. This particular version was not disclosed to Mr. Downer during the conversation on 6 December 2007. Correction, on 6 December 2005. excuse me. The correct date is 5 December 2007. Mr. Mche, in his supplementary affidavit presented after the DA had delivered its replying affidavit, raised a new explanation when he stated under oath as follows, I quote, "McCarthy told me that it would be harmful to the NPA, particularly the DSO, which was under severe attack at the time, if Zuma was prosecuted before the Polokwane conference. He believed that if Mr. Zuma were to be charged before the Polokwane conference, it would destabilize the DSO and NPA and the country. I met the minister during the evening of 5 December 2007. I raised with her the issue that the announcement would possibly be delayed. It was clear to me that she agreed that the prosecution should be delayed. She was concerned that the NPA would be perceived as targeting Mr. Zuma ahead of the Polokwane conference. The following day, in bracket 6 December 2007, I telephoned Downer to inform him of the decision to delay the Zuma prosecution. I told Downer that I had taken the decision to postpone the prosecution independently. I told him that it was my decision and my decision alone. I did so because Downer was aware that I had met the minister the previous day. I did not want him to think that the minister had interfered or that the minister had unduly influenced me. I did not tell Downer that it was Mr. McCarthy who had persuaded me that it was necessary and that delaying the prosecution was a better option for the NPA. I knew that the decision to delay the prosecution was likely to be unpopular. I knew that Downer would be unhappy with that decision. As head of the NPA, I felt that I had to support the decision. McCarthy had already made the decision. I did not want to blame it on others when I knew it was likely to be unpopular. As expected, Downer was angry about the decision to postpone the prosecution, unquote. The paragraphs from Mr. Mche's supplementary affidavit, as quoted above, read with Mr. Hofmeier's affidavit as to who took the decision to delay the service of the indictment and why, presents three contradictory versions. The first version is that Mr. Mche took the decision which was his and his alone. The reason being in consideration of the speech by the then President Mbeki calling for calm ahead of the ANC election in Polokwane. The second version is that he took the decision after being influenced by Mr. McCarthy. He does not indicate when this alleged influence occurred and why he allowed himself to be influenced whilst knowing of Mr. McCarthy's participation in the Browse Mall matter since 2007. He further stated in a draft letter to be sent to Mr. Harley in March that he was not influenced by Mr. McCarthy. The decision to not withdraw the charges was set out in this draft as follows, I quote, "After anxious consideration, I have concluded that my decision to indict your client in 2007 was not influenced improperly or otherwise by Advocate McCarthy. This is notwithstanding the fact that we both agreed on the decision. Even in the event that I'm wrong in this conclusion, having now again reconsidered the decision, even taking into account your representations, I remain convinced that it was and is the correct decision," unquote. This decision was the decision to prosecute. The third version is that it was Mr. McCarthy who took the decision and he, Mr. Mche, felt he had to support it. If this was indeed so, why did he have a difficulty in disclosing this unpopular decision that was not his to Mr. Downer, who at the time was reporting to Mr. McCarthy? It seems from the reading of the answering affidavits of Mr. Hofmeyer, confirmed by Mr. Mche on behalf of the NDPP and Mr. Hali on behalf of Mr. Zuma, that an attempt is made to attribute the decision to postpone the service of the indictment to Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Mche portrays himself first as a person who was in charge and independently took the decision. Secondly, that he was not persuaded by the minister, but he was influenced by Mr. McCarthy to delay the prosecution. And thirdly, that he, Mr. Mche, acted as an official who was supporting a decision made by Mr. McCarthy. It may well be that there is a plausible explanation for these contradictions. However, the consequence of failing to refer this matter to court, as it was agreed among the prosecution team, the NPA, and after so advised by Advocate Trengo, shows that Mr. Mche's decision is irrational. The DA submits, within the context of Mr. Mche appearing to disown the decision to delay the service of the indictment, that Mr. Mche lied when he failed to disclose the truth to Mr. Downer on 5 December 2007. It seems reasonable to infer that Mr. Mche was also persuaded by the discussion in the meeting with the minister on the evening of 4 December 2007, the day before he telephoned Mr. Downer. On his own version, he did not want Mr. Downer to form an impression that he was influenced by the minister, not Mr. McCarthy, as he now suggests in his supplementary affidavit. Significantly, he neither mentioned to Mr. Downer that Mr. McCarthy had influenced him, nor that the decision was made by Mr. McCarthy. If it was Mr. McCarthy's decision, nothing prevented Mr. Mche from stating this to Mr. Downer. The latter's anger or disappointment would then have been directed to Mr. McCarthy. Apart from the contradictory versions as to who took the decision to delay the service of the indictment and for what reason, there has been no attempt in the papers to explain how Mr. McCarthy's alleged influence and lobbying to have the service of the indictment delayed would have disadvantaged Mr. Zuma. It seems to us that it would be logical to assert the view that the service of the indictment before Polokwane Conference would have thwarted the ambitions of Mr. Zuma to assume the leadership of the ANC. However, it is not indicated in the papers before us how the service of the indictment after the Polokwane Conference, as allegedly advocated by Mr. McCarthy, would have been a tool to influence the outcome of the elections, which, as logic dictates, would by then have occurred. Indeed, it so happened that the indictment was served on Mr. Zuma after he had been elected president of the ANC. In an attempt to bolster this obvious irrational explanation, the NPA and Mr. Zuma brought into their answering affidavits the previous conduct of Mr. McCarthy in regard to his role in the Brown-Small report. The Brown-Small report did not relate to the timing of the service of the indictment, which in this instance is a high watermark of Mr. Mche's reason to discontinue the prosecution of Mr. Zuma. It only served to describe the character of Mr. McCarthy as an officer who is inclined to meddle in political affairs, nothing more. It was information well known to Mr. Mche even before he heard the tapes of recorded conversations. It is irrational to argue that it constitutes the basis upon which the prosecution was to be discontinued. Thus, the information on which Mr. Mche based his decision to discontinue the prosecution on Mr. Zuma is inconsistent with and does not support the allegation that by seeking to delay indictment, Mr. McCarthy sought to influence the outcome of elections and therefore demonstrated an abuse of process. There is thus no rational link between the alleged misconduct of Mr. McCarthy and the decision of 1st April 2009. As already stated, the decision to discontinue the prosecution of Mr. Zuma was taken on the 1st of April 2009. It was announced to the public on the 6th of April 2009. The chronology of events stated earlier in this judgment indicates that at all material times and since the 27th of November 2007, the decision of Mr. Mche and senior members of management team of the NPA had been to continue with the prosecution. The prosecution team led by Mr. Downer also held this view even after Mr. Mche had unknowingly to the prosecution team taken the decision to discontinue the prosecution. Even after the legal representatives of Mr. Zuma had made representations to Mr. Mche and senior members of the management of the NPA during February 2009, the view was consistently held that the prosecution must continue. There is no record that there was a change of this view right up to the evening of the 31st of March 2009 when Mr. Mche and other senior members of the management team listened to the tapes. Mr. Hofmeyr records in his affidavit that he and Mr. Msinyati briefed Mr. Mche and other senior members of the NPA on the content of the tapes. Therefore, at the time when Mr. Mche decided to listen to the tapes on 31st March 2009, he had been briefed about the content and knew what to expect. However, the following day, on the 1st April 2009, Mr. Mche announced to the NPA senior management that after listening to the tapes, he was angry and felt betrayed and therefore have decided to discontinue prosecution. When Mr. Mche announced his decision on 1st April 2009, no discussion was held with senior members of the NPA to source their views on this subject. This omission is critical, considering that up to the 31st of March 2009, they have been collectively discussing and agreed to continue with prosecution. They too had been briefed on the content of the tape, and on the evening of the 31st of March 2009, they heard the tapes with Mr. Mche. It is expected that they individually would have formed some views on the matter. Failure to source their views under the circumstance was irrational. Mr. Mche did not reveal that he had heard new information on the tape, which was not stated to him previously by Mr. Hofmeyr and Mr. Mzinyati during their briefing, and which caused him to change his mind. There is no evidence that after he had listened to the tapes, there was something specifically that he had heard which was not brought to his attention during the briefing. The record reflects that he still had the view that the prosecution must continue, even after he was briefed on the content of the tapes. His sudden, inexplicable turnaround on this matter is clearly irrational. Mr. Mche referred to the pressure exerted on the NPA concerning the fate of the intended prosecution on Mr. Zuma. During argument, counsel for Mr. Zuma stated that his client needed a response from the NPA as he was due to be sworn in as the President of the Republic of South Africa within a few weeks. Mr. Mche was subjected to such pressure that he could not afford the time and space to properly apply his mind on the implication of what he was about to do. He failed to exercise and apply the balancing act of the two imperatives necessary for the consideration of the abuse of process doctrine. Mr. Mche ensured that the prosecution team and Mr. Downer were not informed of the decision until 6 April when he was to announce it to the public. If indeed the decision had been rational, and above board, why the secrecy? Needless to state that Mr. Downer, unaware that the decision had been taken on 1st April 2009, the following day, on 2nd April 2009, submitted a comprehensive memo motivating why prosecution needed to continue. Mr. Mche did not allow or offer any opportunity to Mr. Mgwengwe, the Director of Public Prosecution in KwaZulu-Natal, who had authorized the indictment and thus the prosecution, to listen to the tapes and state his views. It was, after all, the indictment he had signed concerning a case he had authorized prosecution which was being discontinued. Mr. Mche failed to explain how the information he had heard on the tapes could be said to have affected, compromised, or tainted the envisaged trial process and the merits of the intended prosecution. In fact, in his media address, he concedes that the alleged conduct of McCarthy had not affected the merits of the charges against Mr. Zuma. There was thus no rational connection between the need to protect the integrity of the NPA and the decision to continue prosecution against Mr. Zuma. He totally ignored the concerns he had personally raised prior to making the decision that the information from the tape and the representations from Mr. Zuma's lawyers had to be investigated, verified, and tapes authenticated. Mr. Zuma, in his own Mr. Mche, in his own words, on 1st April stated that he felt angry and betrayed. It is our view that his feelings of anger and betrayal caused him to act impulsively and irrationally, considering the factors as stated in the preceding paragraphs. He did not allow himself to consider the question whether the very decision he was about to take could be regarded by other people facing similar charges throughout South Africa as a breach of the principle of equality before the law, or that it would be an abuse of process to discontinue charges against people of high profile or standing in the community. The NPA ignored his own views as set out in the draft letter that was to be sent to Mr. Hali, which conveyed the following. I quote, "The conflict between your client's defense and prosecution's evidence can only be determined if all the evidence the prosecution and your client wish to adduce is presented and tested in a court of law," unquote. For the reasons set out above, this court finds that there is no substance in the submissions of the respondents and the amicus curiae. Conclusion and finding. Having regard to the constructors of the evidence before us, we find that Mr. Mche found himself under pressure and he decided to discontinue the prosecution of Mr. Zuma and consequently made an irrational decision. Considering the situation in which he found himself, Mr. Mche ignored the importance of the oath of office, which demanded him to act independently and without fear and favor. It is thus our view that the envisaged prosecution against Mr. Zuma was not tainted by the allegations against Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Zuma should face the charges as outlined in the indictment. The respondents further argued that since the charges against Mr. Zuma were formally withdrawn on 8 April 2009 after Mr. Mche decided to discontinue the prosecution, The order sought in the notice of motion may be of no consequence. We are constrained to state that the said technical argument was not raised in the papers and it cannot render the order we are to make hearing inept and ineffective. This court, for reasons stated above, finds that the decision of 1st April 2009 by Mr. Mshe to discontinue the prosecution of the case against Mr. Zuma is irrational and should be reviewed and set aside. I deal with the costs. The costs follow the result, and the respondents should bear the cost of this application jointly and severally, the one paying the other to be absolved. Concerning the amicus curiae, in exercising our judicial discretion, we think it would be appropriate. We think it would not be appropriate to make a cost order against it because it was admitted by the court and the opposition to its application was withdrawn by the applicant. Furthermore, the applicant did not persist that a cost order should be made against the amicus curiae. In the premises, it is hereby ordered: 1. The application succeeds. 2. The decision of the first respondent dated 1st April 2009 to discontinue the prosecution of the case against the third respondent in accordance with the indictment served on him on the 28th December 2007 is reviewed and set aside. 3. The first, second, and third respondents are ordered jointly and severally to pay the cost of the applicant, including costs of 3 counsel. And 4, no cost order is made against the amicus curiae. This is the judgment of this court. Court adjourned. All right.
The court will take a short break. We'll give you an update on what has just transpired. Stay tuned.
Expect it, they'll appear magnificent. The lives, the souls, the OMG of the party, in all their glorious, well, glory. Ah, yes, we salute you, party comrade, with a bottle of 3 Ships whiskey for just $119.99 from Tops at Spa.
Trends saw a stage play where 2 great forces were born in South Africa.
The Broederbond formed in 1918, which is the year that Nelson Mandela was born. So these forces were essentially born in the same year.
Brilliant clothing designs and jewelry comes from cement.
So we try and guide the artists and the designers in playing, experimenting and testing their work through the medium of concrete.
Behind the scenes of an exciting Afrikaans movie, Modder and Bloed, we met the actors.
Then the cultural backdrop is kind of irrelevant. It's kind of the flavor of the film.
That whole thing brought us all closer together, and it read beautifully on camera. You know, we weren't acting cold, we were really cold.
Join Refulo Muilwa every Friday at 9 p.m. on Trends.
Right, good morning and welcome back. Now, it's a big Super Rugby morning. In the South African side, the Sharks have been in New Plymouth in New Zealand for their second game on the road. Now, the score a little earlier on was tied at 15-all, and that score will be coming through to you because the match is now over. We'll be bringing through that score to you before the end of this particular bulletin. Now, let's move on to other sporting news where we're going to be previewing what the Lions have been doing. Now, with regards to the Lions themselves, they're preparing for a thorough test at scrum time against the Hurricanes in their Super Rugby clash in Johannesburg this coming Saturday. Injuries have forced the Lions to rotate their props in the starting 15 as they front up to one of the best scrummaging units in the competition.
The Lions' opponents for the weekend, the Hurricanes, have been hard to pin down so far this season. However, their scrums rank amongst the best in Super Rugby. And with the Lions bringing in Dylan Smith and Peter Scholtz to join Akka van der Merwe in the front row, it's time to see the depth in the Joburg squad.
It's up to our new front row and a young front row saying that they must take up the challenge and hopefully give us that platform. But it's a great opportunity for players.
While the Hurricanes have match winners in the likes of Bowden Barrett, the Lions have the consistency of Elton Jantjies. Jantjies edges Barrett in the point-scoring stakes, as well as offloads. And so the battle of the fly-halves will be key for this matchup.
210 is going to be a huge challenge, but I think it's up to the rest of the team to assist them to do well. And therefore, my belief is that hopefully we as a team will give Elton that assistance to have a great game as well.
Another trump card is the form of Ruan Combrink, ranking in meters made, clean breaks and defenders beaten. The Lions winger also scored 2 tries last weekend against the Kings. Gone are the days that the Lions would be ranked outsiders against visiting Kiwi opposition. In 2016, they're lying second in the South African group with 6 wins and just 2 losses. Simon Burke, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, before we do anything else, just to bring you up to speed with that score, that full-time score between the Chiefs and the Sharks, it was a narrow loss for the Sharks by 2 points. The Chiefs, 2-time champions, running out 24-22 winners. Now, the transformation in sports journey has gone down a new road with the Minister of Sports, Fikile Mbalula, imposing penalties of 4 of the five big federations that make up the South African sporting landscape. Earlier this morning, I spoke to Dr. Willie Basson, a member of the Eminent Persons Group that is a custodian of the stated mission to revolutionize and change South Africa through sport for the better. I started by asking him what he thought of the accusation that this was political interference.
I don't know, in terms of having been involved for a long time on the subject, and particularly, as I said, over the last 3 years, in collecting data and analysing the state of sport, it is clear that there had to be more intervention in making sure that we do not go for another 20 plus years and we stay in the same spot marking time.
Dr. Basson, you pointed out that federations have only got themselves to blame for not meeting the same targets that they signed on. What actually inspired the specific targets to say netball, football, rugby, cricket, this is what you're aspiring to and this is what we're going to mark you on? What inspired those targets?
Yeah, well, I think it was inspired by the fact that for many years we had this very vague target of 50% black representation in our international teams. Now, for 20 years, sport was left on their own, really, except having been spoken to and reminded of this target. The inspiration for this new approach was because there was always the accusation that there's government interference or ministerial interference in this target-setting exercise. It was then decided that, well, let's allow sporting codes then to set their own targets, because we also realized that transformation and the rate of transformation is unique and specific to a sporting code. So sporting codes, as part of the barometer exercise, was allowed to set their own targets in the dimensions of the Transformation Charter. This they did in April of last year. And they were then audited in the same way as the previous 3 years at the end of 2015.
Well, there you have it with the sports news. But breaking news right now, the North Gauteng High Court will today rule on the President Jacob Zuma spy tape charges. Now, a full bench will hand down judgment in the matter relating to the dropping of the 783 charges of corruption levelled against the president. For the latest now, let's go to our reporter on the scene, Tumole Mshlaudi, who is at the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria. Tumole, a very good morning to you and welcome.
A very good morning to you, Elvis. Well, judgment has just been passed down here at the Pretoria High Court, North Gauteng High Court, and judgment coming through, not very good news in terms of what the judgment here is in the spy tapes saga, basically ruling that the then Director of National Public Prosecutions, Makoteti Mche's decision to basically throw out the charges against President Jacob Zuma, who was Deputy President Zuma at the time, was irrational. I'm joined now by the DA's Musi Maimane. Mr. Maimane, your reaction to the ruling here?
Yeah, it's a victory for the rule of law. It's a victory for the Constitution. It says that Jacob Zuma must face a prosecution. It says the decision was irrational to discontinue charges against him, and therefore we welcome the fact that he will have what he's always asked for, his day in court. It maintains that Jacob Zuma is not fit to be president of this country, and we've fought this battle for many years, and I delight that today the judgment has ruled in our favor to say this decision was irrational.
Right, and having said that, is this the end of the road for this process? Because I think that there are still some avenues to appeal or to take it further to another court.
Jacob Zuma can use taxpayers' money to do whatever that he's using to go to whatever court. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the decision that they took was irrational, and we still maintain Jacob Zuma is corrupt. Jacob Zuma must face the full might of the law, and he's already violated the Constitution. There's no debate about that, and we'll continue this battle.
Right, and in terms of continuing the battle, where to now for the DA?
We go to the National Prosecuting Authority. We want the charges to be continued, and we want Jacob Zuma to have his day in court. So I'll go there. And if the ANC wants to go appeal at the SCA, we will find them there. We'll find them at the Concord, because it's time now that Jacob Zuma faces the full might of the law.
How soon before this process can take its next logical step in terms of the charges being reinstated and the court proceedings?
Well, now I'll see what the NPA does. Obviously, the judgment has just come out from now, and then we'll see what decisions they take subsequent to that. We'll take our own action to make sure that we hold the NPA to account, that they can't make decisions in manga business. Right. They must, in fact, make sure that they charge Jacob Zuma.
In light of what has been said here in court, how do you prevent an institution like the NPA from repeating the same mistakes? It just went to show that the NPA was unduly influenced politically in terms of what the judgment means.
I mean, you can recall, I made this point, I've been making this point all along, that we must firewall our institutions of government. Democracy relies on institutions. And therefore, what you desperately need is to ensure that the powers of the president to appoint the National Director of Public Prosecutions must be taken away from the president and be given to Parliament, so that we can ensure that that institution has oversight on that. Because President, particularly Jacob Zuma, is not going to appoint somebody in that position who is going to prosecute him. He did the same with Nongqobo Jiba. We've maintained that that case is coming up soon. But today our key focus is the fact that we must build institutions that work in our democracy.
Mr. Maimane, thank you very much for your reaction. That was DA leader Musi Maimane reacting to the news and the judgment here at the North Gauteng High Court. With that, it's back to you in the studio, Elvis.
Mahole, what a judgment there. You heard it live there from the North Gauteng High Court, and of course judgment against the president, and we'll take this case further and we'll Follow it all the way. You have to stay tuned to your favorite channel. You don't want to miss the issues that come out of this particular judgment. Now, the DA has won the court bid for the review of President Jacob Zuma's corruption charges. The High Court in Pretoria says that decision to drop corruption charges against the president in 2009 was irrational. Judge Aubrey Ledwaba handed down judgment in the application by the Democratic Alliance for the decision to be reviewed. Ledwaba read out the detailed judgment dealing with various aspects of the judgment, including rationality.
It would not be appropriate to make a court order against it because it was admitted by the court and the opposition to its application was withdrawn by the applicant. Furthermore, the applicant did not persist that a court order should be made against the amicus curiae. In the premises, it is hereby ordered: 1. The application succeeds. 2. The decision of the first respondent dated 1st April 2009 to discontinue the prosecution of the case against the third respondent in accordance with the indictment served on him on the 28th December 2007 is reviewed and set aside. 3. The first, second, and third respondents are ordered jointly and severally to pay the costs of the applicant, including costs of free counsel. And 4. No cost order is made against the amicus curiae. This is the judgment of this court.
Judgment, and that's all we have for you today here on Newsroom. Now today, in studio we had a wonderful performer who basically has done it all. And of course, listening to Garth Taylor, who launched his album last week, this is what you can expect from his latest remark. In fact, no, we had a performer from Cape Town. That's the performance that we played last week. But today we have Nonhlanhla Shandu. A very warm welcome to her as she takes us to the top of the hour.
grow strong. Mountains high to climb.
A very good afternoon. You're watching the Midday Report.
Lunchtime news amplified.
But for now, this is what they call home. Their hope to shift to a higher ground seems to be against the tide.
Midday Report provides you with more than just news stories.
I just want Port Elizabeth to know that they own a world-class theatre.
Good afternoon. You're with the news at 1 in the headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. This is News Live. I'm Natasha Thorpe. Let's take a quick look at what's coming up in your headlines.
Good afternoon and welcome to A View from the House.
For all things news, tune in to Midday Report weekdays at 12 noon, only on the SABC News channel.
Molemo, when pregnant with her first daughter, Relebogile knew that she wanted her daughter not to experience any identity issues. This is when she decided to look for toys that resembled Black as Beautiful.
I think for me, it was also just to get our girls to have some sense of identity, some sense of belonging.
I grew up having black and white dolls and going to a multiracial school. I did not really see color. So for me, it's this thing of she should actually know what her true identity is.
Join your host, Buleng Mulebadze, on Bophelong every Friday at 17:30.
A romantic adventure film starring Ivan Buerta and Donnelly Roberts. The story begins in the beautiful vineyards of Paarl in the Western Cape. The adventure takes off when the characters find themselves on the tropical island of Love, Mauritius.
Josephine's work is more interesting and distinguishable. She visits war-stricken zone countries to tell the story of the damage war often leaves behind.
In this particular exhibition's case, places that are named after conflict or disaster or war or reconciliation.
And basically what it is it's a collection of the best animated short films from around the world this year. And the idea is to inspire animators and directors with this exciting content. And so that's been offered to us as a cinema, and we're very excited to be screening the animated show of shows here in South Africa.
Join Refulo Mula for that 1 hour weekly dose of arts and entertainment news every Friday at 9 p.m. on Trends.
A very good afternoon. You're watching the Midday Report.
Lunchtime news amplified.
But for now, this is what they call home. Their hope to shift to a higher ground seems to be against the tide.
Midday Report provides you with more than just news stories.
I just want Port Elizabeth to know that they own a world-class theatre.
Good afternoon. You're with the news at 1 in the headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. This is News Live. I'm Natasha Thorpe. Let's take a quick look at what's coming up in your headlines.
Good afternoon and welcome to A View from the House.
For all things news, tune in to Midday Report weekdays at 12 noon, only on the SABC News channel.
According to the World Health Organization, the number of people who are obese doubled between 1980 and 2008. Furthermore, 35% of adults over the age of 20 are obese. More than 2 in 3 adults are considered to be overweight or obese. More than 1 in 3 adults are considered to be obese. More than 1 in 20 adults are considered to have extreme obesity. Furthermore, 35% of adults over the age of 20 are obese. In 2010, overweight and obesity were estimated to cause 3.4 million deaths, Lancet reports in 2013. South Africa has the highest overweight and obesity rate in sub-Saharan Africa, with up to 70% of women and a third of men being classified as overweight or obese. A staggering 40% of women in our country are obese, according to the Heart and Stroke Foundation. The bulk of our population used to be physically active, particularly in 1970 to 1999, and ate a diet high in fiber and indigenous vegetables, low in animal protein and refined carbs. However, due to increased urbanization, people are adopting a more westernized diet, high in unhealthy fats, sugar, and salt. Greater disposable income and a faster-paced lifestyle have resulted in people consuming more fast foods and convenient foods, according to the European Association for the Study of Obesity. The Department of Health realizes the seriousness of the obesity crisis and has included this in their National Non-Communicable Diseases Strategic Goals to assist with the obesity problem and increase physical activity by 10% by 2020, reduce the consumption of alcohol by 20% by 2020, reduce the percentage of people who are obese and overweight by 10% by 2020. Obesity has a significant impact on health and well-being. It may also burden a person's workplace abilities. Workers who are obese may need longer rest breaks to return to their initial state of muscle function. 2.6 million people die each year as a result of being overweight or obese, according to the World Health Organization.
This situation demands urgent strategic action encompassing a wide range of sectors, including those responsible for food and beverage production, manufacturing, marketing, and retail.
Obesity has major implications for the healthcare systems in South Africa as they are faced with increasing demands of care for health conditions related to obesity, overweight such as diabetes mellitus, osteoarthritis, cancers, and major cardiovascular diseases. There is no single cause of all overweight and obesity. There is no single approach to treating or preventing it. Treatments may include a mix of behavioral diet, exercise, and sometimes weight loss drugs. In some cases of extreme obesity, weight loss surgery may be an option.
News Today keeps you informed with news locally and around the world.
When Judge John Hlophe challenged the Supreme Court of Appeal when it sent the matter back and said that there must be an inquiry set up.
We unpack business news.
There's an increase in general inflation in the country.
We give you up-to-date news of the day.
The drugs were seized at several locations in Sydney, including a shipping container sent from Hong Kong. Police say it's the largest haul of illicit drugs in 2 years.
We round up sports news.
Kotata, tell me about the legacy that you would like to build and be remembered for.
Trying to get my foundation running, which is going to focus on, all the sport, doesn't matter disability or able body. So, I'm passionate about sports.
Stay informed every Monday to Friday from 3 to 5:30 p.m. CAT. SABC News.
Vera Ephraim defied family and traditions to follow her dream.
Decided that I'm going to prove to them that they were wrong.
The first breakthrough came in when she was studying and touring in Europe.
That was my first breakthrough.
Generations was her first television debut in South Africa.
It was my first gig. I was very excited. I was very happy. I said, yeah, this is confirmation I'm at the right place.
After pain, rejection, and suffering, her dream became a reality.
I followed my path, and I'm happy and grateful and blessed.
Join your host, Puleng Mulabati, on Rupilong every Friday at 17:30.
Technology isn't all scary. There's also fun stuff like gaming.
Lots of women do play games, whether it's on their phones or their tablets.
Then there are Africans who are using new tools to make other people's lives much easier.
We typed the whole CV on a small, QWERTY Nokia phone.
For all these and other technology and social media news, join me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time on SABC News.
Live from Johannesburg, this is your midday report. Good to have you with us. Let's take a quick look at your headlines. Well, starting at the Pretoria High Court, which has set aside the NPA's decision to drop charges against President Jacob Zuma. And coming up